Hey, good morning, guys. We're really in a new era for trade policy with this latest move, the biggest move we've ever seen from President Trump, hitting all of these goods and tearing up, not only upending what has been decades of fairly free trade across North America, but also tearing up effectively his own North American trade deal that was a signature accomplishment in his first term. But what we're seeing now is all three countries retaliating. We're seeing some tariffs, a lot of them hitting U.S. agricultural goods. Some reports out there that the Agriculture Secretary, Brooke Rollins, says her message to farmers on this who are worried about a trade war is to trust President Trump on this. Beyond tariffs, though, we're also seeing some non-tariff measures, China blacklisting some companies. And as we await Trudeau, we also hearing that Ontario's Premier Doug Ford just told the Wall Street Journal that he's willing to put a 25% export tax on sales of electricity to 3 U.S. states. That's Minnesota, Michigan, and New York. He says he's also willing to cut off exports of nickel. That's a critical mineral used in a lot of manufacturing. The U.S. Defense Department buys a lot of that, about 50% of it. So more to watch there while we await some specifics from Trudeau. More to wait for as we hear about retaliation from Mexico as well. Mexico's president says she does plan to speak with President Trump likely on Thursday, and that she'll lay out her country's retaliation on Sunday. So more of that over the weekend. And just one last thing, guys. I just saw the White House trade advisor, Peter Navarro, out here just outside the White House. And I tried to ask him what I thought were some of the biggest questions on our minds today. Just how long might these tariffs stay in effect, and will future tariffs be added on top of them? But Navarro told me simply that, as the boss says, referring to President Trump, we will have to wait and see. So a lot of questions for the White House, a lot of questions for the other countries as we wait for Trudeau. And for more details here, guys, back over to you.
Megan, you had some reporting during the trading session yesterday suggesting that there weren't any phone calls scheduled and that the thinking was this would actually happen today, which of course it did. Has that changed? Do we see anything on the schedule beyond these pressers?
The only thing we see on the schedule is this call with Mexico. She says, Claudia Sheinbaum, the Mexican president, says it's likely to happen on Thursday. So it doesn't look like it's scheduled yet. We do know from the first time around that the Trump administration, the Trump White House, has been a little bit friendlier towards Mexico than it has towards Canada. We do not know yet about any calls with Canada. And then one of the things that's been most surprising to me this go round is how little conversation there's been with China entirely. Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, Howard Lutnick at Commerce, they've spoken to their counterparts in China, but we do not have any knowledge of any calls at all between President Trump and President Xi. I actually posed this question to President Trump yesterday and said, have you spoken with Chinese President Xi about all of this? He said, I don't want to tell you that. And then he ended his press conference. So we do not know of any calls on the schedule, which really does raise the question of how are we going to get an end to this?
Well, for Canada and Mexico, it's terrible for their economies. As I outlined earlier, more than 30% of Canada's economy is trade with the U.S. More than 40% of Mexico's economy is trade with the U.S. They need to try to stop these tariffs. And I'm curious what they have to do that. Do we know? Is it about fentanyl deaths? How do we measure that? How can we figure out how they can pacify the president to put an end to this? Or do we have to wait till Justin Trudeau is out of office?
That could be something that helps his relationship, or Canada's relationship with the U.S., I should say. But you're absolutely right. This is why Canada and Mexico can't just try to wait this out. They can't hold firm and say we're only going to fight back, because they're very dependent on the U.S. market, more than we are dependent on theirs. And the White House knows that. They're playing it to their advantage. The White House has been very firm today. We heard Howard Lutnick say it on Squawk Box that this is all about fentanyl and having 0 American deaths from fentanyl. But obviously that's a high bar. It's also not the only thing that we're hearing from the White House. Sometimes we hear the president talk about moving automotive production or other manufacturing back to the U.S. Just in the last hour, he was posting on Truth Social that if companies move their manufacturing headquarters to the U.S., then there will be no tariffs. Obviously, that's something that takes several years. And the majority of global trade these days, guys, is companies shipping things to themselves overseas. It's multinational companies that are sending things around, and that is especially true in North America, the number of companies that have manufacturing plants in all three countries. So this disrupts all of that, and we don't know exactly what the White House needs to see. I'm still wondering if a market reaction like this could lead them to back off a little bit, but we just don't know yet.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Another one.
also these headlines from the Journal today about Ontario issuing a 25% export tax on electricity to the United States raises the question about not just economic resilience, but political resilience. We'll see how that comes about. There are definitely some trade hawks within Canada.
Yeah.
Megan, thank you. Megan Casella. What does this mean for the markets, and can the market regain its footing? Dow's down 780. Let's bring in Dan Niles, Niles Investment Management founder. Dan, it's good to have you. Are you surprised by any of this?
No, not really. I mean, there's a reason I came into this year, and one of my top 5 picks was cash. And I thought the market could be up 10% in a perfect scenario, but I also thought it could be down 20. So to me, this is not that surprising. And I know it's all about tariffs right now, but let's not forget at the end of February, before this really ratcheted up over the last 2 days, the NASDAQ was already down 2%. The Magnificent Seven were already down 6%. The S&P was up 1%. So the big problem was earnings, because 6 of the 7 Magnificent Seven companies that reported, their forward numbers for the March quarter all had to get cut from where they were before. And then obviously with NVIDIA, the stock went down 8.5%. at gross
Dan,
margin.
let me interrupt briefly as we got Trudeau at the mic.
Partner and ally, their closest friend. At the same time, they're talking about working positively with Russia, appeasing Vladimir Putin, a lying, murderous dictator. Make that make sense. Canadians are reasonable, and we are polite, but we will not back down from a fight. Not when our country and the well-being of everyone in it is at stake. At the moment, the U.S. tariffs came into effect in the early hours of this morning, and so did the Canadian response. Canada will be implementing 25% tariffs against $155 billion worth of American goods, starting with tariffs on $30 billion worth of goods immediately, and tariffs on the remaining $125 billion of American products in 21 days' time. Encore aujourd'hui,
Again today, we find
de
ourselves forced to introduce 25% tariffs on $155 billion of U.S. merchandise.
De marchandises américaines, excusez-moi. 30 milliards de dollars
$30 billion will come into effect immediately, and in 21 days, $125 billion of U.S. merchandise
Today, we will
be
also
hit.
be challenging these illegal actions by filing dispute resolution claims at the World Trade Organization and through the USMCA. But in the meantime, our tariffs will remain in place until the U.S. tariffs are withdrawn, and not a moment sooner. And should these tariffs not cease, we are in active and ongoing discussions with provinces and territories to pursue several non-tariff measures. Measures which will demonstrate that there are no winners in a trade war. Now, just like I did a month ago, I want to speak first directly to the American people. We don't want this. We want to work with you as a friend and ally. And we don't want to see you hurt either. But your government has chosen to do this to you. As of this morning, markets are down, and inflation is set to rise dramatically all across your country. Your government has chosen to put American jobs at risk, at the thousands of workplaces that succeed because of materials from Canada, or because of consumers in Canada, or both. They've chosen to raise costs for American consumers on everyday essential items like groceries and gas, on major purchases like cars and homes, and everything in between. They've chosen to harm American national security, impeding access to the abundant critical minerals, energy, building materials, and fertilizers that we have and that the United States needs to grow and prosper. They've chosen to launch a trade war that will, first and foremost, harm American families. They've chosen to sabotage their own agenda that was supposed to usher in a new golden age for the United States. And they've chosen to undermine the incredible work we've done together to tackle the scourge that is fentanyl, a drug that must be wiped from the face of the earth. So on that point, let me be crystal clear. There is absolutely no justification or need whatsoever for these tariffs today. Now, the legal pretext your government is using to bring in these tariffs is that Canada is apparently unwilling to help in the fight against illegal fentanyl. Well, that is totally false. Let's look at the facts. Our border is already safe and secure. Far less than 1% of fentanyl flows and less than 1% of illegal crossings into the United States comes from Canada. But we acted because we know we can always do better. We responded to concerns, including from the President, by implementing an ambitious $1.3 billion border plan. A border plan that includes generational investments in new AI and imaging tools to stop the flow of fentanyl in its tracks, stronger coordination and information sharing with American agencies, along with the deployment of drones, helicopters, and additional personnel to keep our border secure. Now, a month ago, as part of an agreement with the United States that paused the tariffs, we made further commitments. We appointed Kevin Brasseau as our fentanyl czar, a man who dedicated his multi-decade career in law enforcement to combating organized crime networks and drug trafficking. We designated 7 drug cartels, sick, evil groups who cynically profit off the pain and suffering of people on both sides of the border, as the terrorist organizations that they are. And just yesterday, we launched a new joint operations partnership supported by a $200 million investment between Canada's security and law enforcement agencies, a partnership that will enhance the coordination of information and intelligence in order to thwart criminal gangs involved in the illegal fentanyl trade. And critically, our actions are working. As the U.S. Customs and Border Protection just acknowledged, there was a 97% drop in fentanyl seizures from January compared to December, to a near zero low of less than half an ounce seized in January, even with all the further enforcements and actions we've taken at the borders. In sum, we stepped up. We engaged closely and constructively with the President and his administration. We did everything we promised. We stuck to our word. And we did it because we believe in working together to protect our citizens. Now I want to speak directly to one specific American, Donald. In the over 8 years you and I have worked together, we've done big things. We signed a historic deal that has created record jobs and growth in both of our countries. We've done big things together on the world stage, as Canada and the US have done together for decades, for generations. And now we should be working together to ensure even greater prosperity for North Americans in a very uncertain and challenging world. Now, it's not in my habit to agree with the Wall Street Journal, but Donald, they point out that even though you're a very smart guy, this is a very dumb thing to do. We two friends fighting is exactly what our opponents around the world want to see. And now, to my fellow Canadians, I won't sugarcoat it. This is going to be tough, even though we're all going to pull together, because that's what we do. We will use every tool at our disposal so Canadian workers and businesses can weather this storm. From expanding EI benefits and making them more flexible to providing direct supports to businesses, we will be there as needed to help. But Canada, make no mistake, no matter how long this lasts, no matter what the cost, the federal government and other orders of government will be there for you. We will defend Canadian jobs. We will take measures to prevent predatory behavior that threatens Canadian companies because of the impacts of this trade war, leaving them open to takeovers. We will relentlessly fight to protect our economy. We will stand up for Canadians every single second of every single day because this country is worth fighting for. Les derniers mois ont été
stressants. The recent months have been stressful and, in fact, exhausting for all of us.
Mais je crois qu'on peut
I believe
être rassuré
we can be reassured by the incredible solidarity.
Prime Minister Trudeau visibly upset, addressing Canadians, addressing the president, and addressing Americans as well. The words there, of course, this is a very dumb thing to do, and vowing not just reciprocal tariffs and non-tariff measures, but also some protections for Canadians themselves, warning them that he won't sugarcoat it. This is going to be tough.
He was more aggressive than I've seen him ever from the Prime Minister Trudeau, and also made some news there in terms of what Canada is going to do to fight back, because he said we will not back down from a fight. So first of all, they are going to impose 25% tariffs on $125 billion worth of U.S. exports to Canada in order to hit the U.S. back. He also said they're going to challenge this at the WTO, the World Trade Organization, and through the USMCA, which is the trade agreement that President Trump previously brokered between Canada and Mexico. Also threatened non-tariff measures if these tariffs do continue, but wasn't specific about what that is. In other words, other retaliatory moves that they could make. I thought was really interesting, addressing Donald directly, saying we've done big things together. This is what our enemies want to see. They want to see this friendship hurt. That was perhaps the most powerful. Clearly, he knows how big and hurtful this is going to be to the Canadian economy, and that's why he said it's going to be tough. I mean, you know, in the words of President Trump, they don't have the cards. U.S. has the leverage here because we are the economic superpower. So he mentioned some things they were doing when it comes to the border and fentanyl, but I think they need to get a call on the schedule and figure out exactly what Trump has in mind here, because otherwise it could be devastating for Canada's economy.
Yes. Megan Casella, he did talk about the amount of fentanyl seized, less than half an ounce in January. He seemed to be telling the president and the White House, what more can we do?
Absolutely. That's about the firmest, most direct, most aggressive that we've ever seen Prime Minister Trudeau towards the U.S., at least that I've seen in recent memory, and really coming out, laying out everything that they've done, coming off as very indignant and saying, we did everything that you asked for. We have held up our end of the bargain. My biggest question, especially standing right here, is how this is going over inside the White House. I'll be going into the building right after this to try to figure that out. But you have to wonder how the president is reacting to this. Someone who he already doesn't have a great relationship with is Trudeau, and then Trudeau not only addressing Americans head on, but also addressing the president by his first name, calling this a very dumb thing to do and making it clear that they don't know what else they can do in order to satisfy this administration. So a lot of questions about what happens next, but as Sarah just said it, they do need to get a call on the schedule. I don't anticipate the White House hears that and immediately wants to reach out, but I'd keep an eye on Truth Social and we'll see what happens next.
Really quickly, Megan, I thought it was notable, too, that while this was all about trade and how he disagrees, in the opening lines from Trudeau, he did mention Russia. And I don't remember exactly what he said, but definitely questioned, at least, the Trump administration, cozying up more to Russia, what he called a murderous dictator. And I thought that was also notable.
I also noticed that and found it really interesting. He was sort of using it as more examples of things that the U.S. administration is doing that he was pointing out to Americans and Canadians is a big shift, obviously, from previous policy and maybe something that people don't want to see. He also said that two friends fighting like this is exactly what opponents and adversaries want to see, alluding again, I thought, towards Russia and towards China. So interesting there that he's trying to appeal maybe to better nature and saying, take a look, take a step back and look at everything that's happening and put it in the big picture of how different things are now.
All right, we'll wait for White House reaction, Megan. Thank you very much. Go see what you can find out. For more, let's bring in the Premier of Alberta, Canada, Danielle Smith. Last year, Alberta sold more than $160 billion of goods to the United States, including more than $130 billion of energy, which does get tariffed, but only 10%, not 25%. Thank you for joining us. What is your reaction from what you just heard from Trudeau?
So disappointing. We've been doing everything we can, not only our federal government, but all of the subnational governments to try to avoid this outcome. We, as you heard, we've been working on the border, and we've been putting up drones, putting up helicopters, putting up more personnel. We've been very successful in stopping people from coming across the border from the United States. We've been stopping drugs from coming across the border from the United States. We've brought those numbers down. We thought that that was what the U.S. president wanted. And to see this escalation is so disappointing, so damaging initially to American consumers and American businesses who buy Canadian goods and raw materials. But then now with the counter tariffs, it's also going to be harmful to Canadian consumers. No one wins a tariff war. And so we want to go back to looking at the agreement that we signed, the USMCA, that has served us well for a number of years. And I don't know why the president is behaving this way, because it's illegal. We're going to challenge it. And we would like to get back to negotiating some of the pressure points on that.
How bad is it going to be for Alberta economically?
I must say, like I've talked about the 10% tariff with our producers and those who sell the goods, and then everyone's going to take a little bit of a bite on that. Our producers are, the refiners in the United States are going to have higher costs. American consumers are going to have a higher cost. You're going to see it, the price at the pump, more so in the areas where refineries are 100% reliant on Canadian oil. So it's and as you know, if you increase the cost of energy, you increase the cost of everything. So it's going to have an inflationary effect in the U.S. We're already seeing the effect on the stock market today. Investors don't like the decisions that have been made today. And the best move would be to try to de-escalate as quickly as possible. Let's get down to talking about what the real issues are, as opposed to a pretext, and then solve those irritants so that we can get on with having the best tariff-free relationship that I think any two nations have in the world.
Premier, do you think this is truly about fentanyl?
I think it was, but I think we've demonstrated, I have to tell you, like when I'm looking at the bus that we have at the border, it's cocaine and crystal meth coming up from America. So these are issues that are two-way issues. America has cartels and organized crime that are causing problems for us. And we recognize that it is a two-way street. They should too. We want to be able to address those issues collaboratively, share the intelligence. But to act as if this is only a one-way problem, remember, there's a lot of distance between Canada and Mexico. There's a big country in the middle. And so we are not the root of a lot of the problems. We in fact, are having some spillover effect of those problems, as we've noticed as we've started doing a lot more work and stoppages at the borders. You're going to see more of that now that we found so many drugs coming up from the United States. We're going to have to do more stops of American trucks coming across the border so that we can stop that too. We're doing our part to be able to bust the fentanyl operations that are happening in our country as well. But I think that this is a problem we should be working on collectively rather than pointing fingers suggesting it's just a one-way street. It's not.
Yesterday, we heard from Doug Ford of Ontario with this threat about raising taxes, let's say, on electricity that is shipped to the U.S. Today, the Journal headline lays out exactly that. Are there varying levels of appetite to retaliate within some of the premiers in Canada?
I've already said that we're not going to retaliate on energy. That is such an essential product for American consumers and American businesses. We want to make sure that we've got some, 4.3 million barrels a day going into the United States. We want to make sure that flow continues, albeit it's going to be a little bit more expensive because of the 10% tariffs. But I would say that we would rather be talking about ways in which we can remove tariffs altogether. What you'll see with the tariffs that have been imposed today, $30 billion with another $125 billion to come in 21 days, is focused on things that we can easily replace, that we can find other sources, whether it's Canadian sources, whether it's sources from Mexico, whether it's sources internationally. And the problem that American producers are going to face is that as we start changing those supply chains, those can get stuck, and it's hard to go back to relying on an unreliable trading partner. So I would say the sooner this gets resolved, the better, because one of the things that Americans need to understand is that we are your best customer. We buy more goods and services from you than anyone else in the world. And so when you put these tariffs in place, it means that we're just going to buy less from America at a time when the Americans seem to be wanting to sell more. It doesn't make sense to treat your biggest customer this way. And I think the markets are showing that. And pretty soon, sadly, American families are going to be feeling it as well.
We can talk about it all we want on the economics, but when it comes down to it, I mean, we have a president that is a businessman and that negotiates deals. And there's a specific personality there. And what we have seen from Prime Minister Trudeau is that it doesn't appear to be going well in terms of that relationship and that capacity to negotiate. Is he the right man to be doing this? I mean, I asked before whether we have to wait till Trudeau is out of office.
Well, we don't have to wait too much longer. It's only 5 days, and I don't know that you'll have much more success with the guy coming in after him. But the fact that you're seeing all of the premiers standing behind this prime minister, that's quite a feat. We all come from different political perspectives. I've had my own differences with this prime minister, but these tariffs are unjustified, and we have to have a proportionate response. We are responding to an aggressive action by your president. That this could have been avoided. We addressed the issues he had about China. We put in the same tariffs that Mexico did, and that they had asked for on electric vehicles and steel and aluminum to be able to stop them from coming into our market and putting it into the United States. We've addressed every issue that was raised about the border. As issues have been raised, we've been solving them, and yet new issues keep on popping up, which suggests that we've got a president that actually doesn't want a deal, and that's a problem. And so what that means is that we have to be prepared that this might not just be a 1 week problem or a 1 month problem. It might be a 4-year problem, and 4 years is a long time. Supply chains, they trade. The supply chains they change, and I would say the sad part is that I put a proposal on the table to the United States about how we can help with American energy dominance. My province is one of the biggest reserves of oil and gas in the world. I would love to sell double the amount that we are right now to the United States. Now we're going to have to look at how we can sell more out the West Coast, out the East Coast, and up north, because if the Americans don't want our products, the rest of the world does. America's been in a very good position by being the first and primary customer and purchaser of a discounted oil. And we're going to have to look for new markets, too, if this persists.
Really quickly, do you have any idea what Prime Minister Trudeau was talking about when he said that if this does last, we're going to look at non-tariff retaliatory measures? He wasn't very specific about it, but there was a clear threat there.
There's a number of things that all the provinces are considering. I mean, non-tariff barriers, you don't need to put a tariff in place. You can also just choose to buy from other countries. You can choose to source materials differently. You can choose to do your procurement differently. I mean, part of the free trade agreement has been allowing for American companies to invest in building out our infrastructure. We build tens of billions, hundreds of billions of dollars worth of construction each year at the municipal level, the school board level, the provincial level, and the federal level. Those are the kind of things that we can look for other suppliers for. So I would say those would be very likely the next steps that would be taken. But we don't want to get there. I mean, we don't want to escalate. We don't want to retaliate. But we have no choice but to have an equal and proportionate response.
Well, it's good to get your initial thoughts, especially coming out of that news conference from Prime Minister Trudeau. Danielle Smith, thank you very much, the Premier from Alberta.
Thank you.
Meantime, with all these headlines crossing, S&P down 100 points. Dow got down 800, just bouncing off a touch from that level. Let's